As I mentioned in my video, Fabian Incrementalism, How to Fight ANC Terrorism with Economic Anti-Terrorism, I laid out a way that we can break the economic, social and military connections around the ANC and then eventually infiltrate the ANC with people um, of say Zimbabwean people who've had some experience of what the future of South Africa could be under the history of them being under Mugabe and others, and those would be linked into an Afrikaner WikiLeaks organisation of Afrikaners, English South Africans, and black South Africans who are sympathetic to our cause for Boer independence. The wider diplomatic strategy and Fabian incrementalism would be based on the strategy that Fabius used, who was a Roman general. What does a Roman general have to do with economic anti-terrorism? Well, against Hannibal, he cut the communication links in terms of roads, cut the rivers with dams, and thus eventually started to make a wall of non-connections around Hannibal, and then Hannibal's force withered from within and from without from pressure, and then disintegrated. This could be used against the ANC. We can make also defensive hamlets in South Africa to operate as though they were fortified encampments like the Boer battle wagon laggers of the past against Zulu raids. We've got to see that these people who are doing the farm murders are acting like light infantry armed with medieval and modern weapons, asangas, canobberies, AK-47s, knives and pistols and other such weapons. Both for the psychological terror value that the asanga or other weapons of torture have, and also the effectiveness of an AK-47 rifle. They're using these against civilian families, women, children and men, and also the farm workers who support the families. So they're trying to do the same thing to us that we want to do in a peaceful economic strategy to them by withering their connections between social and economic connections. What does this have to do with chartered cities? And chartered cities are places where there will be investment and technology put into place rapidly by other powers such as the EU with its various member states, and of course it will be on a large scale of around 100,000 square kilometres, about the same size as Manhattan. This could be the start of an independent Boer republic, because the EU could lease the territory from the South African government under the pretense that it wanted to build an EU base there to protect South Africa from Somali piracy, or in line with the South African defence policy of having a maritime fleet. Now, thankfully, the Boer Afrikaner people are still a significant minority within the defence industry of South Africa, and also within the actual military personnel. So we can make links with them to help them build up their forces within the South African Defence Force, so that they could then support the implementation of a Boer independent state. Now, a Boer independent state would not, because of the PR problem in Europe of the Boers, where the Boers have a very good PR reputation in the United States because they remind the Americans of the American settlers there and the era of the American Constitutional Republic. But in Europe, there is still a core of people who believe strongly that the Boers don't have a right to even exist because of apartheid. Well, Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma, and Julius Malema in particular, who are trying to exterminate the Boers and have killed over 1 million Boers, including 52,000 families that have been logged, and the in crime statistics by the South African Forensic Police, and also because of the rate of killings and rapes and murders in South Africa was higher than in Iraq during the height of the insurgency there. Just shows you how terrible the situation is in South Africa and the need for a Boer independent republic. And as I mentioned in my videos, Cape of Good Hope, how the Western Cape is like the United States almost, and the Eastern Cape is like Afghanistan, and how the Western Cape model could be applied to a Boer independent republic to be the start of a Southern African Union. All the banks would develop their own currency and then eventually link that currency together to make an independent Boer rand, which would be linked to gold and also to the euro currency and the US dollar to get investment in. But the Danes, perhaps, or Holland itself being the mother tongue of the Boers originally, could administer such a chartered city to get the development going. And then from that chartered city we could have high-speed rail and airports which could be built by the EU, and through military Keynesianism would be a EU base or in southern Africa, both for a port and an airport, and then civilian infrastructure would follow as people were drawn to that area. What sort of people would be drawn to that area? Well, and what sort of people would police it? You could ask that private security might be, such as Blackwater, might be brought in to deal with it, but their track record is not completely clean. What about the historical differences aside between the Boers and the English? And the English would like to help the Boers, I'm sure, now, if the general public knew about the protests in South Africa and the protests that have happened in London. Well, what about the 50,000 people who have just lost their jobs in the British Army and the British Police? Wouldn't they like to have? And the wasteful lack of employment for many British and European people, wouldn't they be attracted to such a city that would be administered by Denmark, Holland, and Germany, and an independent Boer Republic kernel of as in the seed kernel of a government that would spring up? Now, Europe has been quite bullish in supporting governments recently that have sprung up and asked for their independence. In southern Sudan, where there's oil, in the Arab Spring countries where there's oil. South Africa has great resources, but its greatest resource is the Boer people with their excellent education and intelligence and hard-working work ethic, and surely they would be the greatest resource of any chartered city that would develop. So we would make economic zones which would have economic rules which would keep the Bantu Zulus out of, and Khoisan out of the Boer Republic areas, and encourage European immigration to them, and Boer immigration and Afrikaner and English South African immigration to the chartered city, which would be one of many chartered cities which would be mass produced by Europe and transported, the materials transported for construction, which would make a multiplier effect in southern Africa and in Europe itself, and for the Boer people, the Boer Volk, to develop a Boer Republic which would be an ally of the European Union but not part of the European Union, obviously, because it's in southern Africa. But it would be part of a Southern African Union, economic monetary union, which would then spread those rules to southern Africa so that the ANC's support would wither as people's intellectual and economic ideas became more advanced and more modern, and people not believing in the Tokolosh and other such things, primitivism, that the ANC sponsors. We have to get ANC moderates on board, and to make the ANC more and more extreme so that they lose more and more support. We can make Boer independence a reality. Thank you for listening.